I'd like to welcome you to our program in Readings in the Chaldea. My name is Brinkley Messick. I'm a professor in the departments of anthropology and Mises, and I was a founding faculty member in the Center for Palestine Studies at Columbia. Located in Jerusalem, the Ahmadiyya Library is one of the most important manuscript collections in Palestine and one of the most significant family-owned Islamic manuscript collections in the world. The library's collection was recently digitized and made available to scholars by the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, HMML. This enhanced the accessibility of the collection to users around the world, and this opening new avenues for the study of the history and intellectual life of Palestine and the wider region. Readings in the Chaldea is a project of the Center for Palestine Studies, which is now in its 12th year, I think. And if you'd like to know what CPS has been up to over these years, please see our 10-year report on the website under resources. Today's event is co-presented with the Ahmadiyya Library itself. Readings is co-sponsored also by the Columbia Center for the Study of Muslim Societies, or CSMS, and the project has been supported by talented librarians at Columbia and at NYU, Kaukab Chibaro and Peter Majerski at Columbia and Guy Burak at NYU. The Readings Project focuses on the newly accessible Chaldea collection, though through conversations with scholars involved in manuscript studies. Recordings of previous sessions are available on the CPS website under Programming Jerusalem. And for information about the Ahmadiyya Library, you can visit the library's excellent new website. As for the digitized texts, these are to be found on the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library website, as I mentioned. Today's session is the first in our third year of our Readings project. And in fact, we're dealing with another library. We had already talked about other libraries, other private libraries, other mosques libraries in the region, the close region near the Chaldea, and we have an example today of the Acre library, the al-Nur Ahmadiyya Library in Acre. I'll just read the abstract for today's paper, before introducing the speaker. Endowed in the 18th century in Acre by the notorious Ottoman governor of Sidon, Ahmad Pasha al-Jazzar, who died in 1804, the al-Nur Ahmadiyya Library was established as a part of the governor's famous mosque-college complex inside the walled city. The recent discovery of this public library's catalog reveals a relatively large holding of 1,800 volumes, a few of which survive in libraries around the world. This talk will explore the history section, which includes about 160 entries. The eclectic but consistent selection of books from humanities fields that exceed the topic of history seems to be a realization of the Arabic proverb, a flower from every meadow. There is, and also the title of this presentation. The result is a well-ordered garden that betrays nothing less than royal aspirations or pretension. In short, this is not a usual college library. So our speaker we're welcoming today is Danad Sajji, a PhD from Columbia University in 2002, is now the Associate Professor of History at Boston College. She's the author of The Barber of Damascus, Nouveau Literacy in the 18th Century Ottoman Levant, which also is in Turkish and Arabic translations. And she's editor of Ottoman Tulips, Ottoman Coffee, Leisure and Lifestyle in the 18th Century, also in Turkish, and co-editor of Transforming Loss into Beauty, Essays in Arabic Literature and Culture in memory of Magda al-Nawahi, our now long parted colleague in what it was then MILAC and is now Mises. Dana Sajji is the recipient of several fellowships, including from Princeton University, Berlin, a Research Center for Anatolian Civilization, the MIT Aga Khan Program in Islamic Architecture, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. She is currently working, I hope I'm up to date on this, is currently working on the history of Damascus based on a local tradition of textual representations of the city between the 12th and the 20th centuries. Ambitious. Thank you, Dana. It's all yours now.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be a part of this series. Thank you, Prince. Thank you, Simone. And I also heard the names of the I recognize two of the talented librarians, Kaukab and Guy. If you're here, I send you warm greetings. And I'm thrilled because my father, Wael, was born and bred in Shara al-Zahra, just outside Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. And he had special love for the Khalidiyya Library. And last time we were in Jerusalem, he tried to take me there. He knows exactly where it is. So this is quite an honor for me. And I should say, مساء الخير. إذا أنتوا معي من عمان أو القدس طبعا أو نابلس، للأسف رح نحكي بالإنجليزي، بس أنا مبسوطة بوجودكم جدا. Let me share my screen. Here we go. So document number 1058 in the archive of the Turkish Directorate General of Endowments in Ankara, discovered by Nada Mumtaz of the University of Toronto, is a survey of books contained in the library endowed by the government of the province of Sidon and sometimes the province of Damascus, the notorious and mysterious Ahmad Pasha al-Jazzar, who died in 1804. He had made Acre, not Sidon, the seat of government and ruled in the area for a good 30 years. Among the many amenities that al-Jazzar built in Acre is the famous mosque madrasa complex, al-Nur Ahmadiyya, to which the library belonged and to which it is associated. The complex today is called Jami' al-Jazzar or al-Jami' al-Abyad. The document is made up of 62 folios and comes as a part of a larger bound codex that includes copies of the deeds of al-Jazzar's endowments, buildings and amenities in Acre. The document is written in the year 1800 by a certain Suleiman Effendi, who identifies himself as the librarian of the collection. In addition to a core collection of books, the document is a registry of 3 more stocks that, according to marginal notes in the document, were added in the years 1801 and 1803. These added collections are probably confiscations, the kind of which al-Jazzar was well known. I do not think that I need to explain to the audience the significance of this document for our understanding of the cultural, intellectual, and social life of Palestine and the larger Levantine and Ottoman worlds in the time period. It is a precious document because up till now, we only have 25 similar documents in all of Islamic history, and these book lists date between the 13th and the 19th centuries. This is according to the research of Said al-Jumani. Our document, which I will call a catalog, though its purpose is to inventory the books and not as an aid for the circulation of books. So I will call it a catalog, although it's not. It's simply a list of books. It includes 1,707 entries referring to 1,818 physical books, making this library the largest in the Levant or Bilad al-Sham. The inventory of the main collection is arranged by subject, as you can see here, and includes a large number of topics, including but certainly exceeding those needed for a madrasa education. So you see here is a graph of all the topics that are included with the distribution. The distribution of topics for the entire inventory, including the added collections, according to Said al-Jumani, are about 47% religious sciences, 28% language and literature, 11% natural sciences, which I think is quite high, and 9% history, which is also high for a madrasa library. This seems to exclude the small number of Persian and Turkish books, which are under a separate subject category. That said, while the collection is mainly in Arabic, in the section that I'm working on, there are a few significant Turkish titles and a Persian title, at least as far as I recognize. It is worth mentioning that the team that is working on this project has managed to locate about 60 something surviving manuscripts in libraries and collections, including Princeton, Dublin, London, Berlin, Leipzig, Istanbul, Beirut, Acre, Jaffa, Nablus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Mecca, Riyadh, Doha, and Tokyo. al-Nur Ahmadiyya Library manuscripts are identifiable because they tend to carry the Waqf seal of al-Jazzar like so. Before I introduce to you al-Jazzar and his Nur Ahmadiyya complex, and then to the topic of my paper, I should mention that I'm a part of a team of about 20 scholars and librarians working together on what we call al-Jazzar Library Project, exploring the history of the library and its afterlives, including the economics of the Waqf, the material aspects of the books through the surviving manuscripts, and the intellectual profile of the library. I am in charge of the history section, as well as the poetry and poetry collections section with my student Khalil Sawan. The editorial team members are Konrad Hüschler in Hamburg, Saeed Al-Jumani in Berlin, and Guy Burak, whom you know well, in New York. 18th century Acre in Ottoman northern Palestine was a major hub of international trade and a node of inter-imperial ambitions during a time which witnessed the rise of local powers that challenged Ottoman rule. In Egypt, the local Mamluk households brought to power Ali Bey al-Kibir and his successor Muhammad Bey Abu Dhahab. In Acre itself, the local strongman al-Zahir al-Umar, who, by the way, is the ancestor of the models Gigi and Bella Hadid, if you know them. Anyway, so al-Zahir al-Umar defied the Ottomans with the support of a Russian fleet. Al-Jazzar, a Christian Bosnian, and he was a barber, an adventurer, made it to Istanbul when he was a young man and somehow ended up serving various Mamluk masters in Cairo. It is doubtful that he himself was a Mamluk. In other words, he probably was not bought by someone as a part of his retinue, but he learned Arabic, converted to Islam, and took office and took the affect and the kind of the clothing of a Mamluk. His nisbah, his sobriquet al-Jazzar, which means the butcher, was proudly acquired when he avenged the murder of his Mamluk master by Bedouin marauders, killing a good 70 of them. So this was a badge of honor that he and his peers were proud of. When he got entangled in a sticky situation, and of these there were many, he escaped in disguise to Istanbul, only to reappear, this time in Lebanon, to serve the Durzi Emir Yusuf. Distinguishing himself as a fighter and administrator, he ended up serving the Ottomans as a legitimate ruler, and according to Thomas Philip, sometimes against their will. Al-Jazzar was a part of a larger 18th century phenomenon in which provincial governors were less servants of the Sultan and more his partners, according to the scholar Ali Yagiolu. Many provincial governors were so powerful that they were able to effectively pressure Istanbul in a power-sharing agreement. Al-Jazzar's most memorable act is his defense of Akka against Napoleon's armies. There is much to say about the man, but for our purposes, it is his Nur Ahmadiyya complex that is of great interest. Completed in 1786, the Nur Ahmadiyya complex includes a mosque, a madrasa, here's the mosque, a madrasa, a public fountain, here, a water tank, I think it's here, a mausoleum here, and an ablutions fountain, which is very famous, is here, and cells for students, about 40 of them, and a library. The fact that the library has a separate location was a new phenomenon in the 18th century. It is built in Ottoman imperial style. This is quite unusual for Ottoman Palestine and seems to resemble several similar complexes in Istanbul, including, according to Guy Borak, the Sultanic complex Nur Osmaniye. So Nur Ahmadiyya, Nur Osmaniye, it seems that the names try to echo each other. It is said that al-Jazzar took special interest in the complex and that he drew its plans and designed it himself. The fact of his close involvement in the structure leads me to think that he must have been involved in the curation of the library collection, a point to which I shall return. The location of the library is indicated by the sign carrying the Quranic verse, فيها كتب قيمة, wherein are scriptures or books absolutely true, unerring and unerring. In Arabic, immediately for modern Arabic speakers, we think of qayyima as valuable. Of course, it means that, but in the Quranic sense, it's quite different. And this is the same emblem or the Quranic verse that al-Khalidiyya Library is actually carries at its doorway. While the library is expressly associated with the madrasa, the document also mentioned that it was meant to be a non-lending public library. Anybody could use the collection as long as they didn't borrow the books out. Of the books of the book list is a section of the library inventory that is entitled Kutub Ilm al-Tarikh, as you can see here. The section is about 160 entries, but includes 100 titles due to the repetition of some titles. That is when there are several copies of the same work. These 110 titles were written by 74 authors. The reason for the discrepancy is due to the presence of more than one work by a single author, anonymous nature of some works, such as the popular epic, the Siyar Dhat al-Himma, Siyar Antara, they are without authors, and also due to entries whose titles remain unidentifiable. Due to the limitations of time, I will not mention the difficulties and methodological issues that I encountered in identifying the books whose titles appear abbreviated or referenced in ways that are not conventional to us today. For someone like me, who's familiar with Mamluk and Ottoman Arabic historiography, especially the Bilad al-Sham part of it, this collection at first glance seems eclectic, even random. If history in the traditional Islamic definition refers to biography, especially to biographical dictionaries, these are books, what are called in Arabic tabaqat. They are books that include, they're huge books that include many, many biographies. And it's like in American or in the Western world, they're like who's who. So these were prolific in the Mamluk period. So this is a very big part of what we consider historiography or history writing. So if history in the traditional Islamic definition refers to biographies, especially biographical dictionaries, and to events in time as recorded in chronicles, tawarikh, that talk about events in time, this collection is only partially historiographical. Of the 110 works, it includes 20 chronicles and about 25 biographical works. That is to say, less than 50% of the entries are legitimately historiographical. And the titles from the point of view of a historian of Mamluk and Ottoman Syria and Egypt are surprising due to their omissions. One does not see the chronicle of the Damascene Ibn Tulun, or the 15th century biographical dictionary of al-Ghazi, or that of his 16th century counterpart al-Burini, or famous chronicles and biographical dictionaries from Aleppo. God forbid, even the 12th century scholar Ibn Asakir's voluminous and canonical history of Damascus is not found in the cluster. This was really shocking to me. So my immediate reaction is to assume that this collection was an accidental accumulation, perhaps a result of looting and confiscation. Al-Jazzar is reported to have confiscated the collection from the collection of the famous Palestinian Mufti Khairuddin al-Ramli, or his ancestors, the books of the Shi'i Matawila of Jabal Amil in northern Palestine, southern Lebanon, and the stocks of the monastery of Deir Hanna. So we have a Sunni collection, a Shi'i collection, and a Christian collection that are purported to have been confiscated or looted. While these confiscations may have taken place, and the document itself discusses collections that were taken from people and added later, as evidenced by the collections that were added in 1801 and 1803 that I talked about. In the history section thus far, I see very few indications for the the specific confiscations that I talked about. There's only about 3 Shi'i works. There's nothing specifically Christian about the collection. As for the collection of the Sunni scholar Ramli, I have no way of determining this without the evidence of surviving manuscripts that may have had clues on them. So at this point, I cannot conclude that this collection was made from confiscation. But whether the collection includes confiscations or not, upon consideration, far from being an indiscriminate assortment of titles, the history collection shows a deliberate elective eclecticism. The seeming randomness reminds one of the Arabic proverb, min kulli rawdan zahra, a flower from every meadow. However, this is not a bunch of wildflowers. Rather, in its variety, not only does the content exceed history and goes beyond madrasa education training, but in as much as it exceeds both, it is a humanities paradise of choice titles associated with the royal, the courtly, and the refined. And when we zero in on those parts of the collection that are expressly historiographical, one notices that the clusters motivated less by the idea of events in time and more by lives lived in Islamic time. It is, I have a missing page here. It is about memorialization of people, and that is arranged in such a way as to present almost every major hegemonic tranche in Islamic society as recorded in biographical works and even in the chronicles of the collection. The choice of people celebrated shows a variety of flowers from every meadow, but the careful display serves to demonstrate a representation of and reverence to local loyalties and affiliations, and a simultaneous acknowledgement of the sovereignty of Istanbul, whose royal style and panache is to be reflected. Finally, if we consider some of the specific biographies of royals and heroes presented in the collection, we note a deliberate attempt to refract the life and career of al-Jazzar himself, both as a heroic warrior and an established ruler, someone who balances out the heat of the battle with the cool of refined cultivation. In short, this is a profoundly curated collection. It is a manicured and well-ordered garden. Let us start with a variety of topics represented in the collection. In addition to the chronicles and biographical works, the history section includes titles that are quasi-historical, such as cosmographical, geographical, and cartographical works. For example, Al-Qazwini's Ajaib al-Makhluqat, The Wonders of Creation, his Athar al-Bilad, as well as Ibn al-Wardi's Kharidat al-Ajaib. These are wondrous natural geography, cosmographical works. It also includes local topographies, which are considered actually, in fact, historical, most famously Al-Maqrizi's Khitat. Beyond those, there are some decidedly non-historical titles, such as different mirrors from princes. These are books that offer advice to rulers. It also, the collection includes Ad-Damiri's Hayat al-Hayawan, The Life of Animals, which is a zoological work, a work on spirits and jinn, 2 titles on ethics, a commentary on the assemblies of al-Hariri or Maqamat al-Hariri, several poetry anthologies, the wonderful Egyptian work called Hazd al-Quhuf, or The Scowling Faces by Abu Shadouf, which is a satire of Egyptian peasant life, and even Farid al-Attar منطق الطير, Conference of the Birds, which was translated in Arabic only on the modern period. It's in Persian. Remarkably, many of the above-mentioned titles often appear in luscious illustrated copies commissioned by or gifted to sultans, princes, and elite, the cosmographies or al-Hariri or the mirrors for princes. And while the librarian Sulaiman Effendi, our librarian, mentions several instances of gilt manuscripts, that is, manuscripts that are either written in gold ink or are bound in leather that includes gold, none of the entries of the above mentioned titles carry such indications. This, however, does not mean that the books were not illustrated, since cosmographies and geographies perforce had to include maps and other representations. It may be that Sulaiman Effendi was only impressed with gold and was not interested in illustration. Nevertheless, whether these books were illustrated or not, suffice it to say that these are not the kind of titles that a madrasa student of the religious sciences might use in the course of their study. These are precious flowers from an expansive humanities meadows. The diversity of the topics are in excess of history also serve to show that the Pasha or his curating librarian were projecting an image of refinement and polish worthy of royalty. So let us move to the expressly historical titles. I unfortunately do not have the time to discuss the cluster of the chronicles in the collection as a cluster and how they complement each other and collectively attempt to achieve comprehensiveness that is neither local nor provincial nor Ottoman, but almost complete coverage of Islamic history in time and space. I do not have the time, but since the history section literally begins with biographies and ends with them, and the specific arrangement of the biographical works almost leads your glance and thought towards thinking biographically in terms of lives and careers. The collection contains 20 biographical dictionaries and 19 biographies, that is single biographies, including hagiographies. These are biographies of saints, manaqib or virtues, what we call virtues, autobiographies, in as much as travelogues or travel literature are autobiographies. People who've traveled, who write about their travel. This I would consider autobiographical. Biographies of rulers written by someone else, and popular epics of lives heroically lived. So we have 19 such works. Even some of the chronicles mentioned are focused less on events in a specific place and more on the deeds of specific rulers and warriors. In all, the history collection is more about people and less about events in time. The arrangement of the entries is most striking. Whether determined by al-Jazzar himself or his librarian, Sulaiman Effendi, the listing seems to be a deliberate offering, a conscious presentation of representativeness, while being a careful attestation of loyalty and admission to sovereignty, and the connection between the provincial and the imperial. Guess what is the first entry in the collection? It is the virtues of the great Imam. I don't think people would immediately guess who that is. This is none other than the eponymous founder of the legal right of the Ottoman state, Abu Hanifa, al-Imam Abu Hanifa, a right that was not too popular in the Levant, but it was avowedly Ottoman. But in the Levant, an increasing number of scholars and elite families were switching madhab, they were switching their affiliation to Hanafism. So this is the first entry, an acknowledgement of Istanbul. This is immediately followed by another biography of the same Imam. The third entry is on the virtues of Imam al-Shafi'i, the eponymous founder of the legal right or madhab to which the overwhelming majority of Syrians belonged. Through the first three entries, we see the acknowledgement of Ottoman sovereignty followed by reference to local affiliation. These biographies are followed by the hagiographies of the Sufi saints Abd al-Qadir al-Kilani or Jilani and Ahmad al-Rifai, two Sufi saints, eponymous founders of tariqas that were popular in the Arabic-speaking world and less in Rome or in the Turkish-speaking part of the Ottoman Empire. After these entries, we encounter a work on the virtues of all the four imams of the madhabs, which is an acknowledgement of the larger Sunni Islamic world. Then comes the turn of a hagiography of the companion of the Prophet, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari. He is the patron saint of Istanbul, whose death by the walls of Constantinople in a much earlier Islamic time and space allowed the Ottomans to find and found Islamic legitimacy in the city after its conquest. Abu Ayyub means very little to Akkans or Levantines, but means a whole lot to the Ottomans and especially to people in Istanbul. But immediately after visiting the saint of Istanbul, the listing returns to the local, to the autobiographical travelogue of the famous and much revered 18th century Damascene saint Abd al-Ghani al-Nablisi. From individual holy people, the section then moves to the biographical dictionary. The first entry of the kind is the dictionary of the Sufis by the Egyptian Sheikh al-Sha'rani, whose work repeats several times and which is a very popular work at the time. This is followed by biographical dictionaries representing al-Shafi'is and then the Hanafis, which are which are written in Arabic and represent the local Hanafi population. I'm going to skip some discussion of this just so that it's not mere listing. So the section moves from the most holy at the beginning of the section. We moved on to the less holy. We moved to two more biographical dictionaries, this time of scholars, and then to the most comprehensive biographical dictionary of its time, Ibn Khallikan extensive work of the biographies of Muslim achievers. It's called Wafayat al-A'yan. So the pattern is clear. This is an arrangement that admits local and imperial realities and gradually proceeds from the holy to the less holy, from imams and saints to scholars and general elites, and from the specific to the general. This arrangement does get interrupted in some instances. For example, it is later down the list that we encounter a single biographical dictionary written by an Ottoman Syrian in the 17th century, al-Muhibbis, and we encounter Khatib al-Baghdadi's famous biographies of the Baghdadis. It is also slightly later that what might be a part of the famous Shi'i work by al-Hurr al-Amili, and the Shi'i work is called Amal al-Amil. It seems that a big chunk of that book, I guess, I conjecture, was there, and this could have been pilfered by al-Jazzar. As I mentioned earlier, some omissions are noteworthy. Ibn Asakir's biographies of Damascenes, al-Ghazi's, and Buruni's biographical dictionary. Despite the slight disruptions in the order of arrangement and the omissions in biographies and biographical dictionaries, the coverage per se of the numbers of holy and near holy people, here I mean scholars, is rather wide and perhaps complete. The focus on Hanafis and Shafi'is and the selection of celebrated saints seems to be purposefully representative. It includes the local with a nod to the imperial, one eye on Egypt and Syria and the other on Istanbul. But the biographical part of the history section has more for us in store. If the title Al-Mustadhraf is indeed the book of al-Suyuti called Al-Mustadhraf min Akhbar al-Jawari, the most graceful of the reports on concubines, then we have what is akin to a biographical dictionary devoted to women. Even if these concubines are not equal in status as the men who are being represented in the series. And this book title repeats 4 times in the collection. The next few collections down the list are biographical dictionaries of poets and verse anthologies that do touch upon poets' lives. The most famous example is al-Tha'alibi's Yatimat al-Dahr, of which there are several entries and a sequel to it. Again, the pattern of the arrangement is clear. We have moved from the holy to the social, for the lack of a better expression, from imams, saints, and scholars to concubines and poets. The latter two categories are generally indicative of more courtly taste. When you think about them, you think of Abbasid Caliphate and Harun al-Rashid type of thing. Towards the end of the list, we move to an entirely new category of lives and people. We begin encountering biographies of rulers and warriors, and especially warrior rulers. The biography of the Mongol conqueror Timur Lenk, who took the Ottoman Bayezid I prisoner and wreaked havoc on the Levant, including Aleppo and Damascus. The Khwarezmi ruler Menguberdi, the biography of the Yazidi rulers of Yemen in the 17th century, and a book on the sultans and caliphs of Egypt. Of course, given the interest in the imperial center, one expects to see the title, quote unquote, The History of the Ottoman House. These are a bunch of histories of the Ottoman House, of which there are very many and by different authors, and some are anonymous. So the history of the Ottoman House, and this one of the copies that, one of the 4 copies that exist, or 3 in the collection, the librarian says is actually gilded, and one wonder if this is a gift or a work commissioned by al-Jazzar himself. Interestingly, we encounter individual biographies of the Ottoman sultans, the biography of Sultan Murad II, and the Ottoman historians Tursun Bey's biography of Mehmed the Conqueror. And these are in Ottoman Turkish. Also, the book on Mehmed the Conqueror seems to be gilt. And so there's a pattern of treating the Ottomans with glamour and glitter in this collection. Then after the conqueror, and in almost the same breath, comes the biographies of popular heroes. The Battal Name, a Turkish book about the legendary biography or epic of Sayyid Battal Ghazi, the frontier warrior against the Byzantine and an important founding figure for the Ottomans, especially for the aforementioned Murad, Sultan Murad, who modeled himself as a frontier warrior after Battal. After Battal, we meet his mother, the woman of noble resolve, the princess Dhat al-Himma, who's a woman heroine. The penultimate biography is of Yahya al-Barmaki, one of the famous family of the Barmakis who served as secretaries to the Abbasids. The reports on Baramika, by the way, seems to have been popular topic. Titles on them appear in every single library catalog almost that I've encountered. The final biography is the epic of Antara bin Shaddad, the legendary pre-Islamic Black poet and hero. I will not dwell on the presence of popular epics, street stories with oral origins in this collection. To my mind, their presence in a serious refined collection is completely acceptable, if not natural. Not only had Sultan Murad presented himself in the image of the heroic Battal, so the connection to the court is real, but the arrangement shows us that the librarian did not think in terms of legendary versus fictitious, the legendary versus the real, or the fictitious versus the real. The last section of the list is about heroic deeds of people who had lived. That al-Himma and al-Battal are as real as Mehmed the Conqueror and Murad II in the minds of pre-modern readers. So the general conclusion on the collection of biographies is that the sequence of entries opens like a fan or a neatly arranged deck of cards with a clear presentation pattern. From the holy to the social, here I mean scholars, poets, and concubines, to the military and heroic. To put it clumsily, the biographies process from religion to society to state. With regards to its temporal coverage, it includes people from every period of Islamic history. And in as much as it is concerned with life, it seems purposefully representative of both the local and the imperial, to be intentionally inclusive. Imams, saints, Sufis, scholars, including Sunni and Shia scholars, scribes, heroes, and some women, at least a princess warrior and concubines. Even animals are represented if we consider Damiri's Hayat al-Hayawan to be a biographical dictionary of animals. It is a dictionary of animals. This collection is not, so it fits in the collection. So al-Jazzar's history collection is not parochial nor even provincial. Rather, this collection, it is the collection of ideal Muslims and some pre-Islamic lives. It constitutes flowers from every meadow of life bound together on the shelves of one local library. The alert listener will have missed the mention of the Prophet Muhammad. There's not a single biography devoted to the Prophet in the collection. There is one book whose content is popular stories of prophets, and there is one chronicle, a large section of which pays great attention to the life of the Prophet. This is entitled Tarikh al-Khamis fi Ahwal Anfas Nafis by the 16th century Diyar Bakri, who was both Rumi and Syrian from the Ottoman period. So the One Life of the Prophet is a rendition by an Ottoman Syrian Rumi author. One wonders if this is merely a coincidence or if al-Jazzar or his curator or his librarian wanted a relevant and contemporary rendition of the Prophet Muhammad that was a product of the time period. I had said that I was not treating the 20 chronicles as a complete unit and what pattern they show today in my talk. But in as much as my argument is about the fact that this collection is a memorialization of lives and that it has something specific to al-Jazzar, a particular pattern shown by the chronicles seem to be relevant. It seems to me that many of the chronicles focus on and expressly present lives of rulers. The Syrian al-Qaramani's universal history is about rulers as exemplary individuals, and his main focus is Ottoman Sultan. Abu Shama's well-known chronicle, al-Rawdatayn fi Akhbar al-Dawlatayn, is about the Zengid and Ayyubid rulers of the Levant and Egypt. The history entitled Al-Yamini is on the life of Sebuktigin, the founder of the Ghaznavid regime. The part of al-Dawadari's chronicle that is found in this collection is about Abbasid caliphs. And the anonymous Akhbar al-Dawla Saljuqiyya, the reports on the Seljuqid state, is clearly about the Seljuq Sultan. Interestingly, a chronicle on Yemen, تحفة الأسماع والأبصار بما في السيرة المتوكلية, is about Al-Imam Mutawakkil Ismail, who in the 17th century began a regime that will be rid of the Ottoman rule and establish the Zaydi state in Yemen. On important secretarial office holders, there are two works in addition to Yahya al-Barmaki of the Abbasids. Al-Maqari's Chronicle of al-Andalus of Islamic Iberia offers a biography of the famous Nasrid statesman Ibn al-Khatib. So, the chronicles in this collection seem to complement a significant section of the biographies, those about rulers and warrior heroes. Many of the biographies, whether they appear in large chronicles or in standalone works, are of individuals who happen to have had spectacular careers for good or for evil. Sebuktigin is the founder of the Ghaznavid, Menguberdi, the Khwarizm Shah, who stood up to the Mongols, Timur, the world conqueror, who interrupted Ottoman rule, Murad II, the Ghazi Sultan, who regained the territories lost to Timur, Battal and Dhat al-Himma, the frontier warrior's son and his mother, and finally, Mehmet, the conqueror of Constantinople. These are not routinized sovereigns, rulers functioning within established state structures, but they are warriors, splendid winners and honorable losers. Their hands are dirty with the bow and arrow, and their swords are dripping with the blood of the enemy. This is a heroic profile that is perhaps meant to mirror al-Jazzar's own military accomplishments and eventful life. They may be a reflection of the image of the Pasha himself and all the travails, intrigues, battles, and various falls and rises to grace that his career entailed. In contrast to, or perhaps to balance out the dramatic, heroic, and legendary in rulership, the history section includes the works that appeal to rulers' soul and conscience, to those rulers who govern in well-established regimes. This is expressed in the appearance of not one, not two, but all of 5 mirrors for princes. Mirrors for princes are a genre of advice to rulers on good and fair governance. Almost every major Arabic representative of the genre appears in this collection. Al-Mawardi's Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, Al-Ghazali's At-Tibr al-Masbuk, Al-Saqilli's Sulwan al-Muta', Al-Turtushi's Siraj al-Muluk, and add to this the Turkish translation of Kalila wa Dimna. It's called Humayun-Name. Why on earth would a college library or even a public library have such a large collection of mirrors for princes? I can only think that this is the hand of al-Jazzar or his librarian projecting the image of routinized sovereignty and just rule to balance out the heroic and dramatic of founding pioneers. Finally, let me mention one last entry. This is not a literary work, but a document, an endowment document, a waqf of the madrasa complex. So in addition to all these books, there is one document, which is a deed of endowment, a waqf of several of the Mamluk ruler al-Malik al-Ashraf's endowments in Cairo in the 15th century. But these endowments also include a madrasa and a madrasa college complex that also includes a library. I have not had the chance to look carefully into and the complex itself, by the way, is a beautiful and graceful building that still stands in Cairo today. I have not had the chance to look carefully into the complex or the content of the document itself, which actually survives. So it's one of the 60 things that were identified. So I have not had the chance to compare the documents of Waqf, of al-Jazzar and al-Malik al-Ashraf. And I also have not had a chance to compare the complexes in terms of structures. But one wonders if al-Ashraf's complex also served as an inspiration to al-Jazzar, who spent a lot of time in Cairo to build his own in Acre. So Istanbul is not the sole source of ideas, but al-Jazzar's history in Cairo seems to be relevant in thinking about al-Nur Ahmadiyya as a structure and in terms of the content of the idea of the library and its content. The history section of al-Jazzar library exceeds its subject, which is history, its purpose as a madrasa associated library, and its location in the Ottoman Levant. Its eclectic content seeks to present courtly refinement and cultivation in the humanities. Beyond Ottoman time and Levantine space, it attempts to represent a larger Islamic world. In its celebration memorialization of such varieties of Muslim lives, which are listed in a neat sequence from the holy to the social to the political. While doing this, the collection shows responsiveness to local affiliations and loyalties, while simultaneously fastening Acre, or the province of Sidon, firmly to imperial Istanbul. Finally, inasmuch as it shows a preoccupation with the heroic founder on the one hand and the established royal on the other, the collection presents and celebrates the career of the founder himself, who first may emerge as a courageous slayer and ended up ruling parts of the Levant for the duration of a whole generation. The Nur Ahmadiyya aspires to be not only a humanist paradise and a well-ordered garden, but as its name indicates, it wants to be a light of praiseworthiness from Makkah unto the Islamic world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Donna. That was a great presentation. And we'll ask people with questions to put them in the Q&A. And I might just start out with saying, you showed it, the first image you showed us in the PowerPoint is a register. It's a kind of a catalog, as you say, but is it actually a Waqf register of books?
No, it's not. So it is an inventory. We don't know why this inventory happened. It's just a register of books, but it is included in a larger kind of bound with other things that include the Waqf document itself, which talks about the library.
But the Waqf document doesn't talk about the books. It talks about the library.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so, but what were the entry in that first thing you showed us? Were they titles?
Yes. The small. I'll actually share it and show it again.
Yeah.
So here you have ترجمة الإمام الأعظم بخط نسخ قطع الربع مجلد بلا ظرف جلد واحد. مناقب الإمام الأعظم بخط تركي قطع الربع مجلد بظرف جلد واحد. Right? For those who don't know Arabic, it's the title of the book in a way that is very abbreviated. It identifies the hand, the calligraphy. It identifies the size. It identifies if it's bound or not, and it advise if it has a book jacket and the volume number, or not the volume, as a part.
That's very detailed.
Yes, and so you see here كتب علم التاريخ, كتب تعبير الرؤية, of which there are 4 or 5 books. And my section is, I think, 10 folios. I can't remember now.
So we have a question. This is from Alison Gibele. I'll read it to you. I'm so interested in, as you frame it, how, quote, intentionally inclusive, end quote, the collection is. Beyond just works about common or local people, such as biographical dictionaries, are there works written by common writers themselves? Thinking about Ibn Budayr's chronicle that you write about in The Barber of Damascus as an example, if not, then how would you say such people present in the collection otherwise, or are they present at all? Thank you for this wonderful talk.
Thank you so much, Alison, for this great question, because it allows me to expand a little bit further. So, no, common people are not represented. That's why I said hegemonic tranche of Islamic society. So we don't see, except the fact that that the popular epics are there. This does not necessarily mean that it is for common people. As what this document shows me is something wonderful, which is we used to always be surprised if the elites are dealing with what we consider to be popular genres and oral genres. And, we've seen people comment, how come these books are entering serious libraries? And so, as I mentioned, this document gives us a logic to them, a logic that the heroic deeds of people who had lived in the past, of course, Zat al-Himma Battal and Antara bin Shaddad are real figures, except that they were fictionalized over time, right? And so we don't know exactly who really they were, and whether their description it has any reality to it. But for people, whether serious or not, or whether educated or not, the idea that these of their heroic deeds were seen as a part of a larger idea of rulers who are also heroic. So to think that that Battal comes in because, or Murad models himself after Battal, and then Mehmet the Conqueror is mentioned, and then Zat al-Himma, there seems to be an obvious line of logic that goes in there. So I'm just repeating the same point. However, as for the authors of this collection, what is so interesting to me is that while the history collection itself is not focused on Syria and Egypt, which is what I expected, because that's what I know, and it does not include some of the major canonical works on the subject, most of the authors are actually of Egyptian and Syrian background from Mamluk and Ottoman periods. So what we have here is a moment of local production of international, or not international, of cosmopolitan dimension, where it is Syrians and Egyptians who are writing about and talking to almost the Islamic world. So I don't know how much purposiveness I can give this collection, and whether this is something that was curated, but I found it really, really striking. But the short answer is common people are not immediately there, except for that one book. Sorry, The Scowling Faces is a satire. The work by Abu Shadouf is a satire of peasant life in Egypt. It's actually a bit pretty condescending.
Here we have another question. This is from Islam Daya. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, Dana. Two questions. First, do we know the names of the scholars or historians who taught at the madrasa and may have used the books for teaching history or for writing their own historical works? And second, concerning the prophetic seerah, is it classified under hadith rather than tariq?
Hi, Islam. How are you? Thank you for your questions. Nice to hear from you. First, we don't know. Or at least I have not looked at this part. As I told you, we're 20 people, and there are people. Astrid Maya is looking very, very closely at the Waqf document itself. We have Saeed al-Jumani, who's looking at other aspects bibliographically of the library. So I'm trying to resist every temptation to go beyond my section, because I have to write my book on Damascus, and this has taken over my life. That said, I will wait until the other members of the team have finished their sections to see if there are ways in which things overlap. Some other people might have very different results. Already from one of the abstracts, it looks clear that the grammar section seems to have been one for teaching and is made up of textbooks. So there's different levels in this library. And so, no, I don't know who the historians are. And as for the biography of the Prophet, indeed, it might be in another section. We'll wait for Garrett Davidson to come up with the results to tell us about this, or in other sections. And so that should be something very interesting as to where you classify the life of the Prophet.
Okay, here's a question from Izzat. Great talk, Dana. Very informative. I may have missed it in the first part. Who is taking care of the library? Do we know if there are contents that were lost over the years?
Hi, Izzat. That happens. I think he's my cousin from Amman. Hi, Izzat. We have located about 60 surviving manuscripts. The team is working on it very assiduously, very vigorously. And as I mentioned in the earlier part of the talk, which you seem to have missed, these are found in libraries across the world, all the way from Tokyo in the east to Princeton in the west, including a lot in the Arab world and a lot in Europe. So and so thus far, we have located 60 something of these.
So, when is the team meant to report on its final findings?
We submit our articles at the end of January, and we meet in March to talk to each other. And so hopefully the book will go into production next year, hopefully.
So perhaps we should leave it there.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very, very instructive.
Bye. Thank you. Bye, everyone.